What's the worst neighbor from hell behavior you've witnessed? I lived down the street from a heroin dealer. My house was constantly being robbed by his customers. I forgot to lock my car and they stole my GPS. And all my loose change. I didn't lock my shed and they took my lawnmower and gas. I assumed they filled their car up. But on the bright side, they returned the can to my shed after using it. If it wasn't locked up, they would steal it. Which is why I don't have a bike anymore. Superstorm Sandy flooded my house with 2 feet of water. My front door wouldn't close because it had swelled from being immersed in water. My neighbors cleaned my house out. They took everything I own. They even went through my attic. They ripped my jpez out of the wall. They stole my oven, my sink, my furnace, my water heater, my refrigerator, my pavers, my car, my boat, my sports autograph collection with signatures from Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle, my guns. But as expected, they never even touched my book collection. Back to what they took. My guitars, my video games, my TV, my sleeping bag, my computer, and my coin collection. Many stories, but I will leave this bit of speech my genius neighbor spouted last weekend. Screaming this from her front porch to her adult son who just jumped in his Jeep. Comma. Put your seatbelt on. You've been drinking. When I was a baby, the old lady who lived above us put a hose through the window into my cot. Neighbor's kid used to always just walk right in the front door. Before I moved into the house, the original owner murdered the previous neighbor for always parking in his driveway. House is cursed to make annoying neighbors, I guess. Edit. I don't know why people keep saying American Horror Story. No. Edit. People keep asking why we didn't lock the door. My mom wasn't much of a mom and we were 4 young boys who had better things to do than worry about that stuff. Nowadays I'm always locking my door. Cop here. I went to a disturbance call where 2 neighbors were blowing leaves at each other with leaf blowers. They were actually mad while doing this. Looked out of my window to see my neighbor leaning over my 6 feet high fence and stretching right into my yard to saw some of the main branches off my tree. My tree had never extended over the fence and her limb hacking killed it. A few months later, she cut one of the wires attached to our boundary fence that was holding up a shade cloth in my backyard. I called the cops on her. And a couple of weeks later, all the plants along our boundary fence mysteriously died. And seriously damaged some of my trees. And I still have no idea what her problem is. I work in the agricultural industry and sometimes have to help sort out disputes between neighbors. I have always been shocked as to how 2 grown adults, or 2 families, will allow the situation to degrade to the point of violence. One time I was contacted because of a dam usage dispute. Basically, the 2 warring neighbors were unsure of the boundary between their 2 properties and both wanted to use this one particular dam. Both had in the past fenced it off. And both had cut the other neighbor's fence down. I identified who the dam belonged to and provided advice accordingly. The neighbor who came off second best wasn't happy. He didn't say anything to me. Really. But he did throw a ton of dynamite in the dam, rendering it useless. It also exploded, the animals drinking from it at the time of detonation. Another person is suspected of taking revenge on his neighbor for some sort of personal slight. I say suspected because it's been thoroughly investigated and no one knows the clear details. All I can say is that the neighbor disappeared without a trace and rumor has it was cut into pieces and stuffed down an out of commission borehole. On other occasions, I've had to deal with neighbors who have shot at each other, lit each other's infrastructure on fire, stolen each other's property, including livestock, or even in one case, revenge fricked the neighbor's daughter. Keeps life interesting. Found a neighbor of mine putting his trash in my cans. Then when I confronted him, he tried to fight me. Neighbor behind my house would scream at her kids daily to the point our kids would be afraid to play in the backyard. By scream, I mean things such as, "You freaking little Get the frick out here. Verbatim quote, to a kid that looked like he was 8 or 9. My ex even tried to help out one day. One of her kids was up a 3-story tall tree of hers that hung over our fence and wouldn't climb down. I wonder why? In this banshee was screaming all sorts of bile at him to come down. My ex calmly says to the boy, please climb down. Sweetie, you might fall. To try and convince him. The woman then turns on her. What the frick do you think you're doing? Don't you fricking talk to my kids. I made the mistake of calling the cops on her once while she was abusing several people. She then came after me physically. My neighbor cut the cable with her garden shears. I presume an argument over the bill. She wouldn't let the cable company in to repair it. So they had to bypass her house. My house and about 6 others had no TV, phone or internet for 8 days. Not from hell. Exactly. We used to live in a property with 2 units and we were in the back. Lived there for 4-5 years before the new front unit neighbors, a couple in their 60s 70s, moved in. A few weeks in, she complained about our front yard bit, which was not a shared area and it consisted of a tree and 3-4 small bushes. She wanted us to plant something nicer in our private area, 2mx1m, keeping in mind we were in the back so no one from the street could see it anyways. My mum told her she didn't have the time to do that, so she suggested we hire a gardener to take care of our area, and mum told her we didn't have that kind of money to spend. Next thing you know, she sends us her grandson, he would have been late 20s, to try and convince us to change our plants to what she wanted. She hinted we should do it because he was a professional private detective and he was really good at his job. Crazy plant lady. I have actually been a terrible neighbor. It's something I actually still feel a little bad about, sort of. Basically where we lived we would get a lot of snails when it rained. I mean buckets full of them. It was a ritual of my mother's to go out and collect them all and dispose of them humanely with a brick. Being a 6-year-old, I absolutely love snails and would feel really bad for the little guys and would go out and grab as many as I could in order to save them. Of course it made sense for me to simply throw them over the fence into my neighbor's yard where they could go live happily. It was only much later that I overheard a conversation between my neighbor and my mother in which she was saying all her roses had been almost destroyed by snails. The even worse part was apparently they belonged to her husband, the roses, who had passed away, so they held a lot of sentimental value. After that the snails got released to the house behind us, who my mum didn't like, so no one was none the wiser. Sorry lady neighbor, I hope your roses grew back okay. In our last apartment, we lived on the 2nd floor. A family on the 4th floor had this kid who was maybe 3 years old. Every morning between 6 and 8 they'd walk up the staircase after having been out. And most of the time the kid would start crying. Loudly. What was the solution of the parents? Leave the crying kid in the staircase on its own for 15 minutes. Our apartment doors carried sound through them very well. So it was basically like having a screaming 3-year-old in your hallway every morning. Let's just say it got on my nerves rather quickly. So what did I do? Nothing, of course. I'm a sweet lol. I lived in a house that had been split into 2 apartments. Next door was a crackhead. Normally, crackhead kept to herself and didn't bother me except to bum a cigarette or 2 every few days. One day she needed a smoke. But I was down to my last pack. And payday wasn't for another 3 days. So I said no. She must have really needed a smoke. Because it was like a rage switch had been turned on in her head. I turned around and went back into my apartment to get away from her screaming at me. And she went back into her apartment and started pounding on the walls. At least I thought she was just pounding on the walls. Turns out that she grabbed a hammer and was smashing her way through the walls to my apartment. I called her boyfriend, who was basically a decent dude. And he rushed home and got her calmed down. The hole in the walls was basketball sized by the time she was stopped. Luckily for me they were already being evicted. So I didn't have to worry about her anymore. TL. DRHTTP. I. IMGA. JX661R. GIF. Probably late to this, but here goes. Wife and my first house after marriage. We got a completely insane neighbor. She had environmental allergies, which led her to have ridiculous reactions to any chemical. So she spied on us to make sure we didn't clean or spray anything. She had a severe reaction and threatened to sue us when she saw me lining the exterior of our house with chemicals. The chemical I was using was salt. She chased away 3 pest experts that were hired to help get termites out of my house because I couldn't get anyone to treat the area due to her insane reactions when she saw them. Finally rushed a Terminix guy on one day while she was gone. He fixed the house up, and we decided to GTFO. Sold the house for a postage stamp and a pack of chewing gum. I feel like I made a great deal. Good luck, guy who wanted to argue price with me when I was already giving you a good deal. Enjoy the lawsuits and termites. Lived in an apartment over a couple who would constantly fight and blast 80s German electropop shit during weeknights when I had to get up for work at 5 AM. Our current neighbor asked my wife to do some chores for when she broke her leg. Not so bad, right? Well, the same neighbor also asked our other neighbor to do same housework when she was completely fine. The list of chores includes the standard stuff: laundry, preparing meals, bit of general cleaning up. It also included digging out the garbage dump that was once their basement, which was rotten with mold and has to be torn down. And I wouldn't say this neighbor asked for help either. More like demanded it. Oh. And demanded to babysit her kids too. Yeah. While her and her husband got drunk and burned a hole through the cartilage of their noses. And smash out windows to their car and truck. And used a wood stove to heat their home when they couldn't pay any bills. Oh. And the husband once tampered with my BBQ. Drained the tank and cut the hose. Some days you can go on the deck, sit with a beer and listen to them curse and scream and make a ruckus. Sometimes you can even see the social worker pull up their driveway. We call those like we call punch buggies now. It's literally like watching a train wreck in slow motion. It's horrible. It's awe-inspiring. It's saddening and you can't look away at all. The neighbors upstairs keep overflowing their washing machine, which causes flooding in our house. Now I have anxiety whenever I hear water running. Thanks for that. About 10 years ago, when we first moved into our current house, we gave our neighbors a set of keys to our house just in case of any emergencies, or if there was something we needed while away on vacation. We frequently went out of town, and my dad would go on short weekend business trips on which my mom and I would accompany him. Every time we came back, there were always subtle changes in the house, but too small to really question. Like missing condiments, not as much toilet paper on the roll, Matt's rugs seemed straighter and cleaner than when we left, etc. About 2 months later, our family came home from our trip a day and a half earlier. We pull up to our house, and first of all, see a bunch of cars in our driveways, hear the pool and jacuzzi pumps running, and see all the lights on. We go inside only to find our neighbors throwing a dinner party of some sort with a giant mess in the kitchen. Every plate, glass, and piece of silverware we owned scattered about the house. Wine and liquor bottles lining the counter. A slew of people in our pool and jacuzzi. And worst of all, one of our boats missing from the dock and lifts. And the other one filled with people leaving our harbor. The look on the face of the neighbor's wife in the jacuzzi was priceless. A combination of utter shock and heightening fear as she saw my 6-foot big brown dad turning red in the face with intensifying anger. Everyone was out in a matter of minutes, and we had the locks changed. But she was kind enough to send over a team of maids to tidy up the place the next morning. It turns out that for 2 months, they had been using our house on the weekends. We even found loads of their laundry in our washer and dryer. 10 years fast forward. My mom is best friends with her, and my dad just hates her so much. TL. DR. Gave our neighbors a set of keys to our house. They used it to throw dinner parties and use all of our tea while we were on vacation. My neighbor is a 40-something redneck crackhead who is an abusive alcoholic. One time he and his spouse were in a heated argument that could be heard throughout the entire neighborhood. My friends and I were at about an 8 and laughing about it until I heard someone else in their house yell, "Get off. He's bashing her head against the wall." Well, despite being stoned as all get out, I jumped off my porch and burst into the house and grabbed the neighbor around his neck in a triangle choke-like manner and choked him out until the police arrived. I think the cops knew I was baked, but they were happy I prevented what might have ended in a bloody mess. They actually laughed at how red my eyes were and told me to take it easy. TLDR. Choked out my crackhead redneck neighbor because he was bashing his girlfriend's head against the wall. Edit. Whoa. I just wanna say thanks to everyone who had such cool and funny things to say and for the positivity. Just doing what any of you awesome people would do. This was around 10 years ago. We received a phone call from the police station saying that our neighbor had filed a complaint. The complaint was that there was a very large pile of dirt and debris on our lawn in the backyard, and it was obstructing our neighbor's view out their kitchen window. Now here's the best part. My family hadn't even moved in yet. We were in the middle of having the house built. It was a new subdivision. Worst part is, we had a week to have it removed. Otherwise we'd be fined. There is actually a B-law against piles of dirt on your lawn. My friend growing up had neighbors that would shoot a BB gun at their house, dropped dead animals on the doorstep, and even tried selling his older sister drugs to PSS off their mom. Eventually she got cameras installed around the house to catch them doing stuff to the house, but they would sneak around and cut the wires to the cameras. Finally my friend's mom encased the cameras in plastic, and just in time because not too long after it recorded them sunbathing nude in the cul-de-sac. She is 300+ pounds and the guy wasn't much bigger. Cops were called and not much else was done after that. I had a Zaftig lady who had a series of Jamaican and Dominican boyfriends living below me. We live in an area with lots of migrant agricultural workers. When the reggae music had the volume turned up, that was a sign she was about to have really loud sex with one of them. Get your freak on, girl. When I was about 8, my father had rented a bakkie, and in a meth-fueled rage, used it to tear off the bed of my mom's frontier before driving over to the neighbor's house and threatening them with it. We obviously got a restraining order against us. Edit. We really means my neighbors. There was this girl that lived next door to me. Let's call her Boo, because that's what she liked to be called. I invited her over to my house for drinks once, and she stole my steaks from the freezer. That was when I lived in the ghetto. When I lived in a more affluent area, Crazy Still was nearby. Another neighbor stole my cat. The cat went missing for a few days, then showed up back at my doorstep. I took her back in. A few days later, there were "Lost Cat" posters on the doors with a picture of my cat. A neighbor came by while I was still figuring out what to tell her about the cat, and when I opened the door, the cat was standing there between my legs. She was really flustered. When I told her that it was my cat and always had been, she said, "Well, I already paid to have her shots." I can't even fathom what she was thinking. This cat is a beautiful Bengal that likes to hang around on the steps outside of my apartment. Obviously not a stray. My parents' next door neighbor, who is also my mother's cousin, sued them 3 or 4 times over property disputes, and once because his adult son allegedly fell over a decorative rock to prevent said neighbor from parking on my parents' lawn. The guy's house has been condemned, but they still live there. Never had much luck with neighbors, but by God the last one was horrible. They had 2 massive dogs that were completely untrained, never left the house, and were outside day and night 24/7, constantly barking their asses off, setting my dog off as well. One time one of their dogs escaped by jumping the fence off their patio furniture. We had to call animal control because he was sitting at the end of the driveway charging at people who walk down the street. For God knows how long. The second time one of them escaped, they took off and the drunk asshole screamed at my dad for at least an hour, accusing him of stealing their dog. Big surprise when one of them never escaped again after moving their patio furniture away from the fence. Frick those guys. They left a couple months ago and my dad was so excited he took a chair and sat in front of our window watching them load their U-Haul truck. A few years ago, a neighbor 2 doors down decided to replace a fence. However, they felt their backyard wasn't big enough. So they took down their existing fence. They also cut down 3 medium-sized trees that were on the other side of their fence. As in not on their property. Then they built the fence 5 feet onto the neighbor's property. They even bolted it to the neighbor's house. She was a single mom and a brain and breast cancer survivor who doesn't have a lot of money for litigation. I am assuming they just thought there was nothing she could do about it. When we moved though, she did have a lawyer who was helping her. I don't know if the fence has been moved yet. The little old lady across the street from me growing up was awful. Here's a few. Her evil dog bit people, but because her son was a cop it was never put down. Also, she chained it to the street side of the yard. So it could go from her door to 6 feet into the yards across the street. She would walk down the street in just panties yelling at the mailman to ring her doorbell no matter what was being delivered. She sat naked at the window and enjoyed traumatizing the poor man. She befriended my people-pleasing mother who felt bad for her. And then she would come over when my parents weren't there and the older kids were in charge. She would then steal and threaten to whoop us. And her dog finally died. Her son arrested my older brothers. Why? Because she swore she saw them dump rat poison in its dish. A full doggy autopsy revealed the dog died because it was 15 and had doggy cancer. And the kicker. When my baby sister was about 5, she told her, in front of me and my siblings, that she should die because the night she was born was the night her husband died. She then referred to her as soul stealer for several years. PL. Dr. old lady flasher thief. With a biting dog. Who openly told a 5-year-old to die. Repeatedly. Tiny houses all separated by only a thin driveway. Every day. 3 AM. Neighbor gets picked up for work. Nurse. I think. By a car that honks the horn. Just one honk. But totally unnecessary and right next to my bedroom. I go and ask them to ask this person to call or knock on their door instead, and they start complaining about my tree hanging over the driveway. Result. They cut half the branches off my tree, legal, hanging over their property, and the honking continued. I moved. In my first apartment, the tenant upstairs pushed his mattress against the heater. It was a wall electric unit with a turn knob. Turned it on and left. Almost burnt the whole building down. We found out afterwards there was a warrant out for his arrest. Bogan, Australian white trash. As frick neighbor was abusing his girl, so I call cops. He thinks it was other neighbor who he has long running grudge against, so TS on her doorstep and patio table. This is no shthole place either. It's a 500-week townhouse in secure complex in center of city with lots of affluent residents. Other incidents of top of my head include under house arrest for several months, waiting trail for pulling knife on someone, so he is constantly around complex causing trouble and dealing drugs. To minors no less. Steals girlfriend from gang leader who comes around to fight him and they get involved in a machete fight in apartment complex. There are many more, but these are the ones that stick out. This isn't bad, just different. An old neighbor of mine used to dress her greyhounds up in ornate dresses when she walked them. One day she had one of the dogs dressed in a white dress with a veil, and the other in a pink gown. Apparently they were on a quick break after the ceremony and before the reception of an online wedding to another greyhound. My family friend in Chicago has a neighbor that is the biggest piece of shit on the planet. They have 2 little girls 8 and 10, and growing up he would yell obscenities at them like, "Shut up you annoying little shts," and stuff like that. All around a terrible person. Just recently, the father was walking their golden retriever, and the neighbor pulled around the corner in his car. Once the neighbor saw the dad walking, he swerved his car and ran over the dad and the dog. The father went on life support in critical condition and is currently slowly moving on his way to recovery. The dog didn't make it. So now as we wait to get the statement from the dad, the police are building a case from evidence such as the skid marks on the street and the cameras set up on other houses. TLDR. Neighbor cusses at little children. Runs over their dad on purpose, putting him on life support and killing their dog. I live in the Italian countryside, and my house has no fence or gate. All open space. But my neighbors do. All of them have fence with gate, and to have it opened, what they do? Honk the fricker. They all have the fricking remote and key to open the gate, but nope. Let's honk for a solid minute to have the damn thing opened. I feel like these people have actual servants and make them open the gate just cause. Also, another of these neighbors of the screaming beyond reason kids and 24/7 yapping dogs. And said kid seems to own the most squeaky swing in the entire universe. I feel like their father oils it with salted water. Years ago, a crazy neighbor dumped pesticide on the remembrance poppies my parents were trying to grow in their front garden. No idea why. I think he was off his meds. Still, nothing will grow in that spot. Capital P. My parents' current neighbors have a small dog they keep locked up under their house all day and never walk. My parents have even offered to walk it, but they won't let them. It barks all day and drives my parents crazy, but they still feel sorry for it. They also leave it there when they go away, and my parents aren't sure if they have someone feeding it or just leave a bunch of food. Recently they got 2 new puppies which they keep upstairs with them and take with them on holidays, but the old dog still gets locked up downstairs. My parents are on the verge of calling the RSPCA on them because it seems incredibly cruel, psychologically if not physically, to keep an animal locked up like that with barely any interaction. Lawyer here who deals with a lot of land use and real estate issues. I have plenty of stories, but perhaps my favorite is the neighbor who sabotaged the other's septic system, causing a backup during a period of heavy rains. For those who don't know or understand how septic systems work, rising underground water tables are very bad for septic systems, particularly when there's no other water outlet. So the water rose. The septic system failed because the neighbor had plugged the outlet. Turns out neighbor was a bonehead because neighbor lives downhill. So the mucked water flowed onto the sabotaging neighbor's property. Things then spiraled out of control and there were some violent physical incidents. Border disputes. A Tiananmen Square style effort to prevent some minor soil excavation. Neighbor was a meth head, and his backyard began to fill with his collections. He loved old copy machines and large laser printers. It looked like a technology graveyard. My stuff began to disappear. He never wore a shirt, even in the dead of winter. Came home one day and he had run an extension cord from my garage exterior over the fence. His power had been cut off. Another day my garden hose was tossed over the fence and he was filling up water bottles. Called the landlord that day, who informed me the tenant was his son. When I was 15, my family's house burned to the ground. Our awful neighbors sat in lawn chairs pointing and laughing as we watched our whole lives burn down. I'll never ever, as long as I live, forget the smug smirk on the dad's face as he saw me and my little brothers crying over the loss of everything we knew. Frick you, Dave Mart of Molten IL. Frick you. My neighbors in college thought it would be fun to shoot the pellet gun in their backyard. When shooting at cans wasn't satisfying, they went ahead and shot my cat. I was gone at the time, and when I got back home, my cat had ran back in through the window to hide. Blood all over the floors. Took him to the vet who removed the pellet and he died 2 days later from peritonitis. One of the saddest moments of my life. Downhill neighbor behind us cut down the hedge between our house and theirs. Complained we were peepers trying to look into their house from our terrace above. Their dog then tore up our very old 4-foot fence between the houses, and we put up a 6-foot fence topped by a 2-foot section of lattice, max allowed by law, and they could no longer see into our place. Then they built a 3-foot raised deck so they could see over again and called code enforcement and the police because we were peeping again. The police blew them off and code enforcement cited them for the illegal deck which they had to take down. Close bracket. Their chihuahua constantly got out of their fence. I would catch it and return it to their yard because it would wander into traffic. Owner didn't seem to care much. After a few years of this, I was taking my daughters on a walk and the dog darted out in front of a car and was killed. My daughters witnessed this and were pretty shaken up. Arsehole got a new chihuahua the next day. It shouldn't be like a broken toaster oven you just replace. He never fixed the fence and now the replacement dog runs out in traffic. 2. Oh geez, that's easy. My current neighbors. They are absolutely horrible people. They have 3 kids. 6, 3, and 2. Their grandmother's cat had its 5th litter recently so they took 2 of them home. The 3-year-old boy flushed one of the cats in the toilet and it drowned. So they put it into a plastic bag and put it in their garbage bin outside. He actually pulled the bin over and showed my kids the body. My kids were a mess. One afternoon my 6-year-old son came to me and said that there was a cigarette packet with a needle in it in their backyard that the 3-year-old has brought out. I went out the back and it was a pouch just near our side of the fence and sure enough an empty syringe was in there. My kids aren't allowed over there anymore but it's hard to explain to my son because their 6-year-old is in his class. I was on my patio out the front and the 2 and 3-year-old were out the front completely naked and playing in the knocked over garbage bin for about 20 minutes before anyone noticed what they were doing. They wander onto the street all the time. I've returned them about 10 times since they moved in 2 months ago. I heard the mother yell at one of the kids and then heard a smack. The sound of a hand hitting flesh. Then hysterical crying. Right now it's midnight and the mum is screaming her head off at the still awake kids. I've called child services. WSPCA. Spoken to police and the kid's teacher. Living next to them is just doing my head in. Every time I hear a child cry my stomach knots up. I'm a stay-at-home mum so I'm near it pretty much 24/7. Our lease runs out in August and I've already started packing. I was the neighbor from hell once. I realize how much I suck now. But at the time I was apparently just a douche. I lived below a couple with 2 young children. One couldn't even walk yet. I was in a band. And since I worked the 2-10 shift at my job, we recorded our album in my apartment after 10:30 p.m. every night. I can't imagine they liked me at all. But they never really complained and were nice enough when I would see them in the halls and stuff. Still, now that I have my own kid, I realize I sucked big time. Woke up at 2 a.m. to somebody screaming obscenities and firing a shotgun in my front yard. Carefully looked out to see my neighbor in his underwear running towards my mailbox and chasing off. Some people parked by my mailbox. The neighbor lived right next door. And apparently his mailbox had been damaged recently. My mailbox is about 160 feet from the house. We live on a dead-end street. And I think the car had stopped so somebody could take a leak. I live in a nice neighborhood with my wife and baby. I've got new neighbors who are renting the house beside me. Yesterday, while outside in the evening, my new neighbor peed in my flower bed. Peed on a rose bush my granddad gave me. He owns a small town nursery. So now, I'm planning revenge and hoping for passive-aggressive suggestions. I'd have to say that the crazy cat guy that feeds all of the feral felines of the neighborhood spreading fleas and God knows what else. It's not even that he feeds them at his home. He walks into my condo complex and lays food out in various spots for the cats. I lost one dog to disease from those cats. And have a dog with fleas now. Animal control just slaps his hand. Even after visiting him multiple times. To top it off, this dude is a mental hoarder. Super dirty one. His home is probably worth $650k plus. But it's a teardown because of the condition.